December 1st, 2001. Buenos Aires, Argentina. Maria is 43 years old. She's an accountant. She has a university degree, a nice apartment, a car she's still paying off, a life insurance policy she's been faithfully funding for 11 years, and a vacation property she bought in 1998 because everyone told her it would appreciate. She did everything right. Every single thing. She bought the home, got the degree, paid the insurance, saved for retirement, furnished her life, followed the checklist. On December 1st, 2001, the Argentine government froze every bank account in the country. You can't withdraw more than 250 pesos per week. Within days, the currency pegged to the US dollar is abandoned. Within weeks, it loses 70% of its value. 5 presidents cycle through in 11 days. Supermarket shelves stripped bare. Retirees banging pots outside government buildings. Police firing tear gas into crowds of grandmothers. Maria stands in her apartment, surrounded by everything she owns. And slowly, over the weeks and months that follow, she begins to understand something that nobody ever told her. Not her parents, not her professors, not her financial advisor. Everything she spent money on, everything she was told represented stability. Progress and smart decision-making had become worthless. Not damaged, not stolen, worthless. And here's what should terrify you. This wasn't a freak accident. This wasn't uniquely Argentinian. This wasn't a third world problem. This pattern has played out in Weimar Germany, the Soviet Union, Greece, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Lebanon. It repeats with mechanical precision. And it always destroys the same group of people. The ones who followed the rules. The ones who bought what they were told to buy. The ones who believed the system would reward their obedience. Today, we're doing the full autopsy. And I promise you, by the end of this, you will never look at your own finances the same way again. Before we go through the list, you need to understand something important. When most people imagine economic collapse, they picture a movie. Empty streets, burning cars, soldiers on corners, Mad Max energy. Sometimes it looks like that. Most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time, collapse is quiet, bureaucratic, administrative. The stores are still open, but prices change every week. The banks still exist, but they won't give you your money. Your house is still standing, but nobody will buy it. Your car still runs, but fuel costs more than your daily wage. Collapse doesn't mean everything stops. It means the relationship between money and reality breaks. The price signals that organized your entire life, what to buy, when to buy it, how much to save, those signals become noise. And when price signals become noise, every purchase you made based on those signals becomes a corpse. Sitting there, physically intact, economically dead. That's the mechanism. Not destruction, dislocation. Now let's go through the 5 purchases that collapse kills first. One by one. Not as speculation, as autopsy. The first one is the one people resist the most. Real estate. And I understand the resistance. The mythology around property is perhaps the deepest financial belief in the modern world. Land is real. They aren't making more of it. Property always goes up. Your home is your greatest asset. These phrases have been repeated so many times by so many people across so many generations that they've stopped sounding like beliefs. They sound like gravity. They are beliefs. And beliefs can be stress tested. Japan, 1991. After a decade of extraordinary asset inflation, Japanese real estate peaked at levels that were, in retrospect, hallucinatory. The Imperial Palace grounds in Tokyo were said to be worth more than all the real estate in California. Combined, ordinary families were taking out 100-year mortgages, literally multi-generational debt contracts. To buy modest apartments in Tokyo suburbs, they were told this was wise. They were told prices only go up. They were told Japan was different. Prices fell and kept falling. Not for a year, not for 5 years, for over 3 decades. Japanese residential real estate lost 70 to 80% of its peak value in some areas. An entire generation bought homes that became prisons. They couldn't sell. They owed more than the property was worth. They couldn't move. They couldn't rent it out for enough to cover payments. The greatest asset became the greatest liability. United States, 2008. Between 2003 and 2006, American households took on $4.5 trillion in mortgage debt. Federal policy encouraged it. Loose lending made it easy. The entire cultural machine, politicians, banks, realtors, TV shows, told working families that homeownership was the American dream and prices would rise forever. Then it reversed. Home values in Las Vegas, Phoenix, and parts of Florida fell 50–60%. 10 million Americans lost their homes to foreclosure between 2007 and 2014. 10 million people. That's larger than most European countries. The people hit hardest weren't reckless gamblers, were families who bought a house at the wrong time with a loan they were told was standard in a market they were told was safe. Greece 2010. Property values in Athens fell 42% in 5 years. But the price drop wasn't even the real problem. The real problem was that the market froze. There were no buyers. Properties sat unsold for years. And meanwhile, the Greek government, desperate for revenue, raised property taxes. So homeowners were trapped, paying rising taxes on an asset they couldn't sell, in a currency they couldn't control, in an economy shrinking by 6% a year. And Maria's vacation home outside Mendoza lost 60% of its dollar value by 2003. She couldn't sell it. Nobody was buying recreational property during a national emergency. She still had to pay maintenance, still had to pay taxes. The asset had become a cost center. Here's what nobody tells you about real estate. A house doesn't become worthless because the building falls down. It becomes worthless because the financial architecture around it collapses. Mortgages become unpayable when incomes crash. Properties become unsellable when credit freezes. Taxes become unbearable when governments get desperate. And the illusion that you can convert your house to cash when you need it? That illusion evaporates precisely at the moment you need it most. That's the trap. The second purchase is less mythologized than real estate. But in some ways, it's more devastating because it's the asset the broadest number of middle-class households are most leveraged into at any given moment. The car. Specifically, the new car purchased on credit. Venezuela. Before the full collapse accelerated, Venezuelans were buying cars at record rates. Chevrolet, Toyota, Ford, auto loans were common. A new car was a status symbol, a necessity, and people believed a store of value in an inflationary environment. Buy the car now, the thinking went, before prices go up again. By 2016, the economy had contracted by 30%. Inflation was running above 800% annually. And the car, that symbol of middle-class stability, had become one of the most useless objects in the country. Not because people didn't want to drive, they desperately wanted to drive. But because the entire ecosystem that makes a car functional had disintegrated. Fuel, despite Venezuela sitting on top of the world's largest proven oil reserves, became scarce due to refinery collapse. Spare parts vanished because imports dried up. Tires became a luxury. A set of 4 new tires cost more than most people earned in a year. Insurance became meaningless because insurers couldn't pay claims in a currency worth less every day. Tens of thousands of relatively new cars sat in driveways across Caracas, physically intact, mechanically sound, completely useless. You couldn't fuel them, couldn't repair them, couldn't sell them. And you absolutely couldn't keep making loan payments when your salary had been obliterated by hyperinflation. Here's the critical insight. A car is not an asset. It's a node in a network. It requires fuel, which requires refining infrastructure and distribution logistics. It requires parts, which require international supply chains and foreign currency. It requires insurance, which requires a functioning financial system. It requires roads, which require government solvency. Remove any one of those inputs, and the car starts dying. Remove 2 or 3, and it's dead. 2 tons of metal and plastic sitting in your driveway, reminding you of the money you no longer have. And the people most destroyed aren't the ones who bought old cars with cash. They lost little. The ones most destroyed are the ones still making payments on a vehicle they can no longer fuel, insure, or repair. The loan didn't collapse with the economy. The debt remained. The utility vanished. That gap between what you owe and what you can use is where middle-class destruction lives. This is the cruelest one, because this is the purchase made by the most responsible people, the ones who planned ahead, who sacrificed present pleasure for future security, who did exactly what every financial advisor, every government, every advertisement told them to do. And in collapse after collapse, they are the ones who lose the most, precisely because they trusted the system the most deeply. Weimar Germany, 1921 to 1923. Before World War I, Germany had one of the most developed pension and insurance systems in Europe. German workers dutifully paid into retirement schemes. Middle-class families held life insurance policies denominated in marks. Modern, efficient, reliable. Everyone said so. Then hyperinflation destroyed it completely. A life insurance policy worth enough to buy a house in 1914 was by November 1923 worth less than a loaf of bread. Not metaphorically, literally. The insurance company technically honored the policy. They paid out the face value in marks. The marks existed. The payment was made. On paper, the saver was made whole. In reality, the payout couldn't buy a newspaper. German civil servants, teachers, professors, military veterans, people who had served faithfully for decades, who had earned defined benefit pensions, who had done everything right, received their promised payments. The payments simply couldn't buy food. Argentina, 2008. The government nationalized $30 billion in private pension funds, funds that individual workers had contributed to over years and decades. The government, facing fiscal pressure, simply seized them, folded them into the public pension system. Promised benefits would be maintained. They weren't. Inflation, which the government systematically understated, eroded purchasing power year after year. Workers who had diligently contributed to what they believed were private, protected accounts discovered that their retirement savings were neither private nor protected. The money was gone, absorbed into general government spending. The promise remained. The value behind it had evaporated. Lebanon, 2019. Lebanon was called the Switzerland of the Middle East. Then the banks imposed informal capital controls. Dollar withdrawals were blocked entirely, or forced through at artificial exchange rates representing a 70, 80, sometimes 90% haircut. Life savings disappeared. The bank building was still there. The logo still on the door. The staff still showing up to work. But the money was gone. Lent to a sovereign that couldn't repay it, a system that had been insolvent for years while continuing to accept deposits. Here's the mechanism you need to understand. Long-term financial products are promises. They say, give us money today and we'll give you money in the future. Do! But that future money is denominated in a currency that may not hold its value, managed by institutions that may not stay solvent, regulated by governments that can change the rules. Every single one of those assumptions, stable currency, solvent institutions, consistent regulation, is exactly what an economic collapse destroys. The most diligent savers, the most responsible planners, the ones who sacrifice the most, consume the least, trusted the deepest. They lose the most. Now here's the one that's going to make some people uncomfortable. The university degree. And before you stop me, I'm not saying education is useless. Knowledge has value in any environment. A degree is a credential. A signal sent to an employment market. It says, I completed this program, I have this qualification, therefore I am eligible for this job at this salary. Soviet Union, 1991. The Soviet higher education system was vast, rigorous, deeply functional. Soviet universities produced millions of engineers, scientists, administrators, specialists. These degrees weren't decorative. They slotted directly into the state planning apparatus. An engineering degree meant guaranteed placement in a state enterprise. When the Soviet Union dissolved, the command economy that gave those credentials their value dissolved with it. Factories closed, state enterprises were gutted, entire industries vanished. Engineers drove taxis, physicists sold goods at open-air markets, university professors, some of the most educated people in the country, earned less than street vendors. Their education hadn't made them stupid. 2010, youth unemployment hit 60%. Among university graduates, nearly as bad. Greek families had sacrificed enormously to send children to universities abroad. UK, Germany, enormous cost. These children returned with law degrees, business degrees, finance degrees. They returned to an economy that had no use for them. An estimated 200,000 young, educated Greeks emigrated between 2010 and 2015. Greece paid the cost of their education. Germany and Australia received the benefit. The families were left with the debt and the absence. Spain, same era. Youth unemployment hit 55%. A generation of Spaniards, the most educated in the country, is history with degrees that qualified them for jobs that no longer existed. They called them La Generación Perdida, the lost generation, not because they were uneducated, because they were educated for an economy that had already collapsed. A university degree is a bet. Bets that the industries that exist when you enroll will still exist when you graduate. That the salary premium a degree commands today will persist tomorrow. That the debt you take on will be repayable from the income the degree generates. In a stable economy, those bets hold. In a collapsing economy, all three fail simultaneously. The industry restructures or disappears. The salary premium vanishes. The debt remains nominal, unyielding, while the income to service it evaporates. You hold a piece of paper. It costs 4 years and tens of thousands of dollars. It qualifies for a job that no longer exists, in a country that can no longer afford to employ you. The fifth category is the most revealing. All of it. The home theater system, the designer furniture, the renovated kitchen, the electronics, the accumulated material weight of a life built on the assumption that income would continue. Credit would stay available, and the currency would hold its value. Zimbabwe, 2007 to 2008. As hyperinflation accelerated toward its terminal velocity, 79 billion% per month by November 2008, something strange happened. People rushed to buy anything. If you received Zimbabwe dollars, you spent them immediately. Holding them for even a day meant losing purchasing power. People bought goods they didn't need. Not because they wanted them, because a physical object, any physical object, held value better than the currency. But here's what happened to those goods. The electronics broke, no parts to repair them because imports had ceased. The appliances failed, no technicians because the technicians had fled. The clothes wore out, no replacements because the textile industry had collapsed. The goods were consumed. When they were gone, they were gone. No residual value, no resale market. No way to convert a used television back into food, fuel, or medicine. People had traded flexibility for stuff. In a collapse, flexibility is the only thing that matters. Lebanon, post-2019. Beirut was famous for luxury retail. Lebanese families carried significant consumer debt. Credit cards, installment plans, personal loans, all denominated in a currency they were told was pegged to the dollar. When that peg broke, the currency lost over 90% of its value. But the credit card bills still arrive. The installment payments were still due. The salary that once covered a comfortable life now barely covered food. And the furniture, the electronics, the renovated kitchens sat there, depreciating, unsellable, completely. Irrelevant to the daily crisis of finding bread and fuel and medicine. Here's the thing people cannot accept about consumer goods. In a stable economy, buying things feels like building a life. In a collapsing economy, things are weight. They anchor you to a place you might need to leave. They consume maintenance resources you might need for survival. They represent spent capital that can never be recovered. Television doesn't feed you. The designer sofa doesn't protect you. A renovated bathroom doesn't generate income. These objects have value only within the context of a functioning consumer economy. Remove that context. They're just reminders of a life that no longer exists. It's financed by money you no longer have, in a currency that no longer means what it once did. Now step back and look at what we just went through. Real estate, automobiles, financial products, education credentials, consumer goods. What do these 5 categories have in common? They're the 5 pillars of middle-class identity in virtually every modern consumer economy. They're exactly what you were told to buy. They're the checklist. Buy a home, buy a car, get insured, get educated, furnish your life. And in every economic collapse across every continent, across every decade, they are the 5 categories that fail first and most completely. This is not a coincidence. It is structural. The middle class is by definition the class most integrated into the formal economy. The wealthy have diversified assets, often held internationally, often in hard currencies. structured to survive systemic failure. The poor are already operating in informal economies, barter, cash, subsistence systems that don't depend on institutional stability. But the middle class is fully invested. Their wealth is in their home, which is mortgaged. Their mobility is in their car, which is financed. Their security is in their pension, which is institutionally managed. Their future is in their degree, which is leveraged to a specific labor market. Their identity is in their consumption, which is credit-fueled. Every single thread runs through the formal financial system. And when that system breaks, every thread snaps simultaneously. This is why collapses do undestroy the rich. The rich were never fully dependent on the system. This is why collapses don't destroy the poor. The poor were never fully included. Collapses destroy the middle class, specifically, mechanically, almost surgically. And the cruelest part? The purchases that destroy them are the purchases they were most encouraged to make. Let me give you the numbers that nobody wants to say out loud. Since 1900, there have been at least 68 sovereign debt crises, 58 currency crises, and scores of banking system collapses across every continent. That's according to Carmen Reinhart and Kenneth Rogoff's study of 8 centuries of financial crises. The average citizen in the average country has roughly a 1 in 3 chance of living through at least one major financial crisis in their adult lifetime. 1 in 3. And yet financial planning, consumer behavior, government policy, and every advertisement you've ever seen all operate as if collapse is a theoretical impossibility, as if it only happens in other countries. Poorly managed countries, countries that made mistakes we would never make. Weimar Germany was the most culturally advanced nation in Europe.